Tonight's program contains graphic images of death. Viewer discretion is advised.
Frontline is made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. With major funding from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, helping to build a more just world. And additional funding from the Park Foundation, committed to raising public awareness.
Afghanistan is now a deadlier battlefield than Iraq.
I'm not convinced we're winning it in Afghanistan. And frankly, we're running out of time.
Where's it coming from?
A resurgent Taliban attacks and then retreats across the border into Pakistan.
Every attack in the West, every one of them traces back to this area.
The U.S. military does not have the critical mass on the ground to be the deciding force right now. Everybody in the region knows this.
Mr. McCain or Mr. Obama will find that their dreams of straightening things out with 2 brigades are exactly that, their dreams.
Can Afghanistan be won? Tonight on Frontline, the war briefing. The Korangal River Valley, northeast Afghanistan. Along this mountain range, a strategic smuggling route used by the Taliban to bring weapons and fighters from nearby Pakistan. American forces man small combat outposts and wait. They come under attack, sometimes daily.
They're coming a lot closer when they start firing on us now for some reason. It's supposed to be this whole month, so I expect this whole month to be bad. It's already been a bad few days for our company. Lost 2 guys in one day.
Without significant ground troops to engage the enemy, the Americans rely on artillery to keep the Taliban at bay. More often than not, they also call in airstrikes.
No, we just intercepted ICOM chatter right now, so which is enemies talking on the radios, and we get degrees from the cop, so the Apaches will fly along that degree and see if they see anything.
Well, it's been a lot more heavy since Ramadan started. We was going 2 or 3 days without a tick, but since Ramadan, it's been every day, 3-4 times a day. They just dropped another bomb.
On this day, dozens of bombs and missiles were dropped by American forces on these mountains.
Here he comes.
There it is, there it is.
The strikes went on all afternoon and into the night. Tomorrow, they will do it all over again. It has been called the Forgotten War, a war that military commanders concede has deteriorated markedly over the last 2 years. Attacks are at an all-time high. Afghanistan is now a deadlier battlefield than Iraq.
Afghanistan is a place where we took our eye off the ball. It now needs to become a focus again for a new administration.
This is a war that has been of secondary importance since the invasion of Iraq. It has not received the strategic attention, the top-level attention that it has required, and that's why it's deteriorated. Afghanistan is quite a different environment from Iraq. It's a much larger geographical territory. It's a much more difficult terrain. The enemy is more dispersed. The enemy is of a different character. The national forces, the army and the police are far behind where the Iraqi army looks to be. If U.S. policy is based on the premise that U.S. troops are going to fight this war for 5 or 10 years, then that policy is likely to fail.
The next president will face a situation where in the next year or two, he will have to make the decision that faced the Soviets in 1988, either to massively reinforce and to wage a war very aggressively, or to get out. That's the inheritance of the next president, and Mr. McCain or Mr. Obama will find that their dreams of straightening things out with 2 brigades are exactly that, they're dreams.
Today, there are 33,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, trying to secure a country that is larger than Iraq. It's a tenuous holding strategy.
We have about 160,000 troops in Iraq. We've got about a quarter of that in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's got a larger population and a substantially larger territory than Iraq. So it tends to suggest that our policy is that Iraq matters more than Afghanistan.
Every single operation you are doing in Iraq is an operation you can't be doing in Afghanistan. On a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis, there is a direct trade-off between what's going on in Iraq and what's going on in Afghanistan.
The next president will be told, you can't get out of either war in Iraq or Afghanistan. You need to spend more money on training troops. You need to recapitalize the military and equipment, and you might have to think about increasing the size of the military. As one officer at the Pentagon put it to me a couple of years ago, we're out of Schlitz. There are no extra troops left on the shelf. We're at our limit.
U.S. commanders in Afghanistan are saying they urgently need more soldiers to stem the Taliban tide. They've requested 15,000 additional combat troops, but only 4,500 are currently available.
The soldiers in Afghanistan have the great advantage of fighting what's also known as the good war. They just wish they had a little more support. They don't feel that they've had all the resources they need to do what's been asked of them. They understand that they're conducting what's called an economy of force operation, which means we give you what we can afford to give you, do the best you can.
The men from Bravo Company, from the Army's 1st Infantry Division, are just beginning their rotation in Afghanistan. For many of them, it's their first tour. Their assignment? The deadly Korangal River Valley, a center for Afghan resistance. These mountains have a reputation as a place to avoid.
Being in the Korangal meant, daily coming under attack. You feel almost like bait. You're on the top of a mountain ridge, like a piece of bait, and you know the insurgents are coming towards you.
Across the valley, Camp Vegas, a small outpost, is under attack. The soldiers of Bravo Company were accompanied by frontline cameraman Timothy Grucha.
What's that bang bang?
It's Vegas. They're in a tick. They're taking contact. Apparently they've got enemy 100 meters outside their wire. Which is good, which means they can actually see him to shoot him.
What are they saying?
Along the way, Bravo's Afghan translator picks up radio chatter.
Talking about they're not here yet, but get ready.
It could signal an impending ambush. But just as likely, it's the militants taunting the soldiers.
When you hear this, you're ready to kill someone or you're ready to die.
On this day, the troops are on their way to the hamlet of Karangal.
Keep pushing forward. Sunshine's pushing Overwatch.
Yeah, they always watch us. I know they're watching us. You can't really pinpoint on them. Just gotta keep on scanning, keep your head on a swivel. That's all you can do. Hope the Apaches get them or mortars.
Open paths expose them to snipers.
All around on patrols. Don't know they're there till they start shooting at us. It's kind of scary to know you got a sniper out here.
The company lost 2 men this week. They are all on edge.
When we were rolling up, I noticed 3 women running by in front of a house, just sprinting. And women don't do that. You know, they don't do that around here. They covered up their faces, ran, and it looked like one of them had an icon, a radio, to be able to contact the enemy. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna get hit. Pretty guaranteed, 100% guaranteed.
Ready, though? Yeah.
Where's it coming from? They got us pinned down in a tight spot, break. Every time we move, they're shooting at us, so I need a presence here in the Karangal. Just need to push into Karangal.
It was just like, wherever I looked, there was like no cover. And like all I had was like those bundle of branches. Bullets were just kicking up all over the place. And I'm gonna get hit, just keep on running. It was like slow motion because I felt like it was going so slow, but before I knew it, I was already up the hill.
Stay down, stay down, stay down, stay down. I got 2 more left. Hold on to them. All right, Raj. Doc, hey, you stopped the bleeding, right?
Doc.
I just need you to hold on, all right?
And right now our position is wide open from this ridge line, but this is the best place for air medevac, so we kind of have to stay here. And I'm shooting 1-5 just to freaking keep enemy from wanting to come over here and shoot us from this side.
Hey, Yagi, they ready for red smoke? Are they ready for red smoke?
The men light a red smoke stick, which signals the helicopter to beware of hostile fire. Bravo Company has lost 5 men in the first 2 months of their stay here. Their tour will last another year. The soldiers rarely see who is shooting at them. They call the fighters ghosts. But the Taliban and Al-Qaeda issue a steady stream of propaganda videos. And they are growing in strength and numbers.
We're seeing a much broader campaign of violence taking hold. They're asserting control politically by eliminating any semblance of Kabul control over the territory. And by constantly wrong-footing, intimidating, and harassing NATO forces.
They are waging a war of attrition.
The insurgency is still a fairly weak movement overall. But the problem is it's opposed by a weak government. So it looks strong in comparison, and it is getting stronger. I mean, the situation is worse. There's no question about that. Provinces close to Kabul are now having incidents that didn't have incidents before.
You really don't want every shopkeeper in Kabul to believe that the Taliban are winning and they're going to be there very soon. If that sort of a mentality takes over Afghanistan, then all is lost.
The Taliban have had this plan for an insurgency from the very beginning. From the time that they lost power in late 2001, their leaders declared, we'll be back, and we're going to follow a script that we have followed before. We're going to slowly build an insurgency. We have patience. Our clock is a lot longer and more elastic, and we will gradually build our way back, and that's precisely what they've done.
Taliban were not defeated in 2001. Taliban were pushed aside. There was never enough military presence to completely defeat them. They were pushed into Pakistan. They were pushed into the countryside. And there they found the ideological, logistical, and financial support to regroup.
The Taliban have been able to expand their reach thanks to a growing source of revenue.
The Taliban now controls much of the narcotics inside Afghanistan, which is an immense new source of funding. So this is an extremely serious problem.
As the opium economy revived, they have inserted themselves into that as taxers. They have taken advantage of permissive territory in Pakistan to connect themselves to smuggling and other rackets to develop revenue bases. And they have now many tens of millions of dollars, whereas in 2003, 2004, they were struggling to meet payroll.
The Taliban's revival has also been fueled by growing dissatisfaction with President Hamid Karzai, who runs a government that is considered weak, corrupt, and ineffective, despite $15 billion in foreign aid since 2001. The Taliban have stepped in to fill the void.
This is an enormously poor country. Its human infrastructure has been destroyed by 40 years of war. So I think we have to think of Afghanistan as a much longer-term project and a much harder project than even the fight in Iraq has been.
President Karzai, well, he runs a national government that receives a great deal of international support, but the territory that he effectively controls as a president has been shrinking over the last few years, and his ability to govern in a meaningful way from Kabul seems to also to be waning.
Well, you have a very weak state, and part of the problem in Afghanistan is that you're trying to create reconstruction, run a government, run a state, and manage a war in a territory that really doesn't have even the basic rudimentary administrative, bureaucratic, economic infrastructures necessary. So the military campaign in 2001 removed the existing authorities, which were the Taliban. But what did replace them? Nothing.
What we did was destroy the Taliban, or at least its hold on the country. And in doing so, we also destroyed the first stability and the first reliable law and order regime that Afghanistan had in 25 years, and we didn't replace it. So now we have a country that's infested with everything from the Taliban and Al-Qaeda on the insurgency side, to bandits and warlords, to narcotics traffickers. So you're really fighting a beast with 100 heads.
And without significant ground forces to fight all the factions, American and NATO forces have relied on airstrikes to fight the war.
It's unfortunate that so many airstrikes are taking place. The reason for that is the economy of force. We don't have enough boots on the ground in Afghanistan. If you have had more troops on the ground, then a lot of these operations could be carried out in a lot more precise way.
The bombing campaign has taken a toll on the Afghan population. Civilian deaths have doubled over the last 2 years.
Insurgencies historically are among the most bloody of all wars. You're facing an enemy without a uniform who lives among civilians. So it's a disastrous situation for the United States. You can either win or you can lose, but you can't do what we're doing at the moment, trying to do it on the cheap with very few casualties. That's a slow death for the United States in Afghanistan.
In the Korengal, years of airstrikes have pushed many families to support the insurgency.
The Korengalis, they're fighting because it's their area. I mean, this is theirs. They don't like outsiders.
Whether you're American, you know, or whether you're from Kabul, or, you know, if you're not Korengali, you're not one of them, and that's really their mentality.
I mean, they've supported us. A lot of them have, you know, been helping us with projects and things like that. But this is their spot.
There's no one in there that likes us. I don't think even the little kids like us. We try to help them out. And it's so backwards around here. It's ridiculous. It's like we take one step forward with these people and then we take 5 steps back.
There'll be a firefight, rockets land in a village. The next day they're trying to make peace by giving them humanitarian aid, you know, and so they're always talking about how are we supposed to win the hearts and minds of people who don't want us here, whose houses we're bombing because the insurgents are firing from those houses, but they've got to try.
The secret to success in counterinsurgency is not pulling up on large forward operating bases, but by pushing out and living among the population.
He says someone has died. We are going to the cemetery, graveyard, you know.
Going to the cemetery?
Yep.
Where's
Just
that?
let them know, don't shoot at us.
Where's the cemetery?
American bombers have mistaken funerals, weddings, and other family gatherings for insurgent activity.
Roger, just want to pass it up that we'll have a group of elders going to the Alibad Cemetery.
The Korengalis have lived in this valley for hundreds of years, relying on the timber trade for a living.
Where's he going?
The people here practice Wahhabism, a strict form of Islam.
Well, that's fine. We won't keep him and the children. They can have a safe journey back to where they're going. Just tell them to be careful.
Today, the soldiers are headed to the hamlet of Obana. The men from Bravo Company want to find out why a village that was once friendly has turned hostile.
Potentially a dangerous spot for us. Just make sure my guys keep their eyes up on the ridges and choose their next covered and concealed position if we were to take contact.
It's only a few miles away, but it takes the soldiers almost an hour to get there. Only the village elders are in sight. Women are behind closed doors. All the young men are gone. The soldiers say they've left to join the insurgents. Except for this man. He says he is visiting an uncle, but the soldiers suspect he's here to see if anyone collaborates with the Americans.
The elders and the villagers really want what we're trying to do. They really want the projects. You know, they want the road to come down so they can bring their crops and wood out and everything like that. But the Taliban don't want them to do it, and so they're going to continue to tell them, "Hey, listen, we're going to kill you if you cooperate." You know, they'll target a guy every now and again to keep them from jumping on board with both feet.
How are you? How are things?
1 second, some guy will be smiling and shaking your hand saying, "Singay, you know, what's up?" And then the next second they can shoot you in the back.
Be careful when you guys are coming here and just put security for yourselves. We are telling you it's peace here, but maybe they come from over the mountains and they shoot at you guys.
Right.
Counterinsurgency in Afghanistan means breaking up whatever alliance there was between the local population and the insurgents.
We just want to make sure that they're safe and that we're safe so we can continue to provide what they need. I know we brought school supplies last time. We're still trying to get the concrete and the pipes, but they keep shooting at us on the roads and shooting everywhere. Nobody wants to bring the stuff that they need.
What a lot of people don't understand is many of the people in the Taliban are not necessarily our enemy. There is Taliban that can be won over to our side. and there's Taliban that's irreconcilable, that we can't do anything against.
Here is peace. Nobody's fighting from this village.
So nothing else happening, nothing else they want to tell me? Alexander. The problem is the Taliban scare them more than we do, so they're not going to give us any information if they know that they could be killed over it. They know more than what they say, but, you know, just us being here, creating a presence, letting them know that we're still going to be here regardless of what they do to us, I guess is saying enough.
There are some people who just won't talk to you, and you can't offer them anything that's going to make them stop fighting you. But that's probably 1% to 2% of the people we're fighting in most of these places. The other 98 or 99% are willing to reconcile under some circumstances. The better you are at dealing with the irreconcilables, cleaning up the Al-Qaeda cells, for example, the more likely it is that the tribes are going to cooperate with you because they see you as the likely winner.
These ideas are the core of the Pentagon's new counterinsurgency doctrine. They were applied recently in Iraq, where they played a key role in reducing the violence. But the doctrine emphasizes that winning over the population takes resources, and especially troops.
In Afghanistan, we simply don't have enough boots on the ground to provide security on the ground in order to convince the young men that if you work with us, we will not only keep you safe, but we'll work with you to build a better future for you and your family.
The only way Al-Qaeda can be marginalized, the only way that the Taliban can be subdued in the long run is to change the conditions in which they thrive. That is a daunting and, by any realistic measure, long-term project.
And the key to changing those conditions is ultimately not within the reach of U.S. troops. It lies just over the border, in the tribal areas of neighboring Pakistan. After 9/11, U.S. Special Forces chased hundreds of Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters into one of the most isolated regions on the planet.
This is one of the most twisted and rugged landscapes imaginable, where one hillside melds into the shoulder of another mountain. It's full of caves and outcrops, and it's perfect guerrilla country.
Today, the tribal areas provide the Taliban and Al-Qaeda with a sanctuary where they can plot and plan attacks. After 9/11, Frontline was one of the first Western news organizations to film inside the tribal areas. Pakistani journalist Hayatullah Khan filmed these scenes for Frontline.
This is a tribal Jarga.
They were some of the first glimpses inside Waziristan.
In the village, one of Mulwi always address about Al-Qaeda and against the United States.
Like the Taliban, the clans that live along this tribal belt are Pashtun, the ethnic group that dominates the border region.
The Taliban are a product of Pashtun identity, Pashtun grievances, Pashtun aspirations, to be sure. And many of the tribal and other sources of historical sort of solidarity that the Taliban draws upon spill across that border without reference to the distinction between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
There's 45 million Pashtuns. I mean, it's Pashtunistan. 45 million people on both sides of the border, so it's enormous. And they've all been linked for generations. So they don't really see the border in the same way that we do. I mean, this was just a line that was, drawn by the Brits.
They're completely autonomous. They never wanted to be part of Pakistan. They still don't.
The Pashtun have protected their land from foreign invaders for hundreds of years. Alexander the Great, the Mughal dynasty, Afghan kings, and the British have all tried to assert control over this area. They left their mark, but the region remained indomitable.
No government, neither the British nor the Pakistanis who inherited it, have ever really governed this region. When Winston Churchill was in his mid-20s, he wrote that you couldn't occupy this area. It's too big, it's too vast, it's too rugged.
Churchill was a 23-year-old reporter with the British Army in 1897 when he wrote, "Every tribesman has a blood feud with his neighbor. Every man's hand is against the other, and all against the stranger." The British struggled to contain a fierce insurgency on the northwest frontier. British troops were buried in this cemetery in Peshawar, the gateway to the tribal areas. After almost a century of sporadic fighting, the British were finally driven out in 1947. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, they suffered the same fate. After a 9-year war with the Mujahideen, they were defeated and forced to withdraw.
The lesson of the Soviet experience is something we're learning to our heartache. Unless you can shut down that rear base, you can't make progress.
The Soviet Union could never control Afghanistan because it could never control the sanctuaries in Pakistan, to which they returned when they were exhausted by war. That's the role of the tribal territories. It is a sanctuary in a quite literal and physical sense.
In the late 80s, Al-Qaeda also found safe haven here. They moved from places like Saudi Arabia, Algeria, and Egypt, and formed an alliance with the tribes.
Al-Qaeda and radicals at large have been forced marrying into these tribes for 25 years. They're part of the fabric of life. They are the families. They are the merchants. They're the guy that cuts your hair during the day and is willing to shoot a rocket at night. To eliminate the Al-Qaeda sanctuary that's in that region is considerably more complicated.
There's always been a kind of symbiotic relationship. Taliban was a host to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda provided fighters for the Afghan civil war on the Taliban side. But lately, the impression is that the leadership levels are tighter. What you have is a situation that tells you if the Taliban return to power, Al-Qaeda will be there with them.
The Taliban has also had a long-standing connection with the Pakistani spy agency, the ISI. It's an alliance that grew out of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
Pakistanis, since the jihad against the Soviet Union, found extremists to be a cheap man's weapon system. They found the value of what the military calls asymmetric warfare. In other words, fanatical guerrilla fighters trained militarily, organized religiously, can be an extremely effective tool in furthering a country's foreign policy.
In the years after 9/11, the ISI grew worried that without the Taliban as a counterweight, Afghanistan would fall under the influence of its nemesis, India.
The fundamental issue is this. Pakistan owned Afghanistan until 2001. We essentially turned Afghanistan into a neutral territory, and the Pakistanis fear that it's actually going to become an Indian territory. That to them is an absolute strategic loss, and they're going to fight it.
The Pakistan Army supports the Taliban out of a fear, and that fear is located in the belief that the United States is collaborating with India in Afghanistan to essentially encircle and weaken the Pakistani state.
The ISI viewed Afghan President Hamid Karzai with particular suspicion.
President Karzai has been provocatively pro-Indian. He has allowed the Indians to open consulates in Jalalabad, in Kandahar, in other places around Afghanistan. So the Pakistanis are enraged about Karzai. They see this as a pro-Indian state. And in this very difficult, violent part of the world, bad things happen in this situation.
When the Indian embassy in Kabul was blown up by a suicide bomber in July 2008, the evidence pointed to Pakistan's ISI and a longtime Afghan Taliban commander, Jalaluddin Haqqani.
There's recent evidence that the Pakistani intelligence service apparently facilitated an attack by Haqqani's group against the Indian embassy in Kabul, the capital.
A very senior member of the ISI told my newspaper that Jalaluddin Haqqani is one of our assets, and we're not ashamed to say that. Now, that's a pretty remarkable thing to hear from a senior Pakistani official. Pakistan claims to be fighting the Taliban and getting a lot of money from the United States to do that, when in fact, elements within the Pakistani military and intelligence services have kept the Taliban around. You know, they kept them alive as a kind of insurance policy. I mean, so, as a former Pakistani official said to me, we're saving the Taliban for a rainy day.
Early on, the Pakistani military cooperated with America's war on terror. The ISI captured several al-Qaeda suspects and promptly handed them over to the Americans.
In the initial years after 9/11, I think that Pakistan was much more helpful, and the ISI particularly was much less involved in support for the Pashtun Taliban. In recent years, my opinion is that has reversed itself, and that some elements of the ISI are more involved in supporting the Taliban because they're not sure who's going to win in Afghanistan.
Since 2001, the Pakistani army has captured 10 al-Qaeda leaders, but only one senior Taliban commander has been arrested.
The problem for the Pakistan military is the following. Fighting against al-Qaeda in Waziristan is alienating the local tribes and is creating Pashtun resentment. You have an attitude among some in the Pakistan military saying that Pakistan will end up paying the price for what the US wants, and that price may be too high.
When the Pakistani army has fought the militants in the tribal areas, they've suffered heavy casualties.
The idea of getting Pakistani forces to engage against the Taliban in the tribal areas is a few years old, and it hasn't gone well. Pakistani troops have been trained, for the most part, in the most staid, conventional World War II style tactics. They tend to move around in large numbers, and they don't do well fighting tribal warriors who are literally part of the landscape. And so they've tended to get very bloodied, and then they've tended to make deals.
After the army suffered a bruising defeat in 2004, Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf sent a top general to South Waziristan to negotiate with the Taliban commander, Nek Mohammed. The Pakistani army paid him $500,000 in exchange for a promise to lay down arms. Frontline asked then-President Musharraf about the deal.
The United States military was frustrated when they saw the approach you took. Was that a successful strategy?
No, I think it didn't prove good. But one should never speak with hindsight. You have to apply all instruments. We thought if we reached an agreement, that would be the end of it. No, it proved wrong because the people who got involved on the other side, they double-crossed.
The pact with Nek Mohammed didn't hold. The Taliban kept the money and continued its jihad.
Well, I don't think the deals have held up very well. The fact of the matter is those who, I think, practice extreme violence can be rented for a short period of time, but they can't be bought. And that's what the government of Pakistan is finding out.
Since 2004, there has been a series of deals with the Taliban. the most recent in January 2008.
It says, we, the Taliban, agree not to attack the Pakistan army, not to attack the government. You know, we recognize your authority. There isn't a single sentence in that agreement about cross-border infiltrations into Afghanistan. There's nothing in there about military training camps, turning over al-Qaeda, attacking the Americans, not a word.
So why do the Americans tolerate their ally making these deals with the Taliban?
I think that they feel like the Pakistanis have them over a barrel. What are they going to do?
On the other side of the border, in neighboring Afghanistan, American forces have been directly affected by the deals. Each time the Pakistanis sign a ceasefire with the Taliban, cross-border incursions into Afghanistan have gone up by as much as 300%. Barred by the Pakistanis from sending ground forces across the border, the Americans have been forced to fight the war remotely.
For years, they've put up these unmanned Predator aircraft that have missiles on them and like little cameras, and you know, some guy back in the United States steering them with a joystick and firing and killing militants.
What we're doing now is a policy of sort of selective airstrikes against key leaders, assassinations, if you like. And even that has caused a huge amount of political controversy.
In June 2004, a Predator killed a major Taliban target. It was Nek Mohammed. He was buried as a martyr. His grave became a shrine. And in his place rose a new commander, Baitullah Masood, the ruthless new Taliban boss of South Waziristan. In these images, Masood is interviewed by a reporter from Al Jazeera, his face obscured.
Baitullah Masood is a local tribal radical who has forced his way into the leadership of the Pakistani Taliban by violence, primarily. He's essentially an Islamist smuggler who is rooted in South Waziristan and has gradually built up a militia that has become the most powerful of its type in South Waziristan.
Bands of young men have taken control over much of the tribal areas. This militia, called the Vice and Virtue Brigade, operates near Peshawar. Like Masood's militias, it enforces brutal Taliban justice. Women who don't wear full hijab are stoned. Men who drink alcohol are tortured. Political rivals are killed.
The Taliban has decimated the tribes. Here's a tribal structure that's been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've just killed the tribal leaders. The Taliban has basically replaced them.
Baitullah Masood has cemented his control over the tribal areas by forming an alliance of some 40 factions. They call themselves the Taliban Movement of Pakistan, and they've vowed to take power and bring to Pakistan a new Taliban rule.
Today, Baitullah Masood is operating in a comfortable alliance with other Taliban leaders in a broader cause. He has built this federation from South Waziristan all the way up towards the Himalaya Mountains. So you now have an organization, at least in name and to some extent in fact, that is operating across the entire Afghan-Pakistan border on the Pakistani side for the purposes of overthrowing the Pakistani government. That's its stated ambition.
Masood's militias have moved outside of the tribal areas and have now taken over swaths of the neighboring Northwest Frontier Province, and in June 2008, closed in on its capital, Peshawar.
They have gradually come down from the hills into settled territory in Pakistan. They control territory not just in a military sense, they also are administering territory. And right now the Taliban are in control of this territory, and they're not about to hand it over to Pakistan.
The war's coming home to the Pakistan government. For years, they've had this relationship with the fighters and the Taliban in the tribal areas. They thought they could control them. It turns out they can't. I mean, they're out of control. You know, it's Frankenstein has gotten off the table.
This is now a full-fledged insurgency. You have individual Pashtun, Pakistani tribal leaders rising up and revolting against the central government. Pakistan is in danger of becoming a failed state with 50+ nuclear weapons.
Pakistan, as a very, very large country with nuclear weapons, has a very fragile government that is challenged by jihadists. And I think the nightmare scenario for U.S. interests in the region, it's not Iraq, it's not Afghanistan, it's a failed state in Pakistan.
Many people pinned their hopes on former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. In 2007, after years in exile, she returned to Pakistan to challenge President Musharraf in the upcoming election. At a rally in December, she vowed to stand up to her country's growing Islamist insurgency. As she departed, the crowd shouted, "Long live Bhutto."
The evidence is that the suicide bombers who killed Bhutto were dispatched by Ayatollah Masood. Whether he was acting alone or as part of some other collaboration with elements of the Pakistani state, I think is a mystery that may never be resolved.
Bhutto's assassination was the culmination of a wave of extraordinary violence, which ultimately led to the resignation of President Musharraf.
If you just look at what's happened, President Musharraf, the military leader for 9 years, he's gone. Benazir Bhutto, the woman that everyone thought would come back to kind of save the country, come back from exile, she's dead. You have a wave of suicide bombings, maybe 60 suicide bombings. You now have in the tribal areas themselves today this gigantic movement of the Taliban spreading in both directions, into Afghanistan, into Pakistan, pretty clearly out of control.
In September, Benazir Bhutto's widower, Asif Ali Zardari, became Pakistan's new president.
May Allah Almighty help me and guide me. Ameen.
General Musharraf may have looked upon the war against terror as an opportunity of getting American cooperation and assistance. President Zardari and Prime Minister Gilani look upon the war against terror as Pakistan's war. And the reason why they see it is because Mr. Zardari's spouse, Benazir Bhutto, became a victim of terrorism. So this elected government is very committed to eliminating terrorism.
The United States government is talking about how it has every right to go across the border. All the candidates are saying it. What's going on?
First of all, the United States does not have the right to go into a sovereign country that is its ally without the permission and approval and consent of that ally. My response to that is that when you have a government in Pakistan that wants to act responsibly anyway, give that government a break.
But Washington was unwilling to wait. Days before President Zardari took office, American special forces were sent into the tribal areas without prior approval.
The danger is that the Americans are going to squeeze too hard. This is a very weak government. They were just recently elected. And they got the United States leaning on them saying, go in, go in, go in.
We will not tolerate the violation of our sovereignty and territorial integrity by any power in the name of combating terrorism.
While President Zardari was talking tough, the Pakistani Taliban sent its own message. 2 hours after his first address to Parliament, insurgents bombed the Marriott Hotel in Islamabad. It was one of the worst attacks in Pakistan's history. More than 50 people died, including 2 Americans. Pakistani officials suspect the suicide bomber came out of Waziristan, but Baitullah Masood denied any involvement. Back in northeastern Afghanistan, in the Korangal River Valley, Bravo Company is bracing for many months of cold weather. Even with the snow, the insurgents will keep crossing over from Pakistan. A top U.S. general in Afghanistan predicted it will be the most violent winter yet. Unable to drive the Americans from the Korangal, the insurgency has adopted new tactics. They've been threatening Afghan contractors that help at the base and have started planting bombs along the road that the Americans just built. On this day, the men of Bravo Company must rescue a Humvee that has fallen into a ditch. It's a time-consuming task, which makes them easy targets. They are attacked repeatedly. In one firefight, 2 Afghan contractors are wounded.
There you go!
And in the end, nothing can be done to save the Humvee.
There it goes, there it goes, there it goes.
The soldiers destroy the Humvee to prevent it from falling into enemy hands.
The stakes in Afghanistan are very high. The U.S. military does not have the critical mass on the ground to be the deciding force right now. The assumptions about how do you have outcomes in these conflicts, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, how do we win, how do we avoid losing, have all fallen apart. Everybody in the region knows this. And I think part of the challenge of the next president is not just to get bogged down in the bean counting with brigades and troops, etc., but rather try to put its hands around what do we do with this region as a whole.
Don't get too close. Go, 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 go.
This report continues on Frontline's website,
They got us pinned down.
including briefings for the next president. What is the biggest threat from Central Asia? What lessons from Iraq can apply to Afghanistan? What should our strategy be toward the tribal areas? More on the history of the tribal areas, including Winston Churchill's vivid descriptions from 1897, a profile of Taliban leader Baitullah Masood,
Their leaders declared we'll be back.
plus extended interviews from the program.
There are no extra troops left on the shelf.
And watch the full program again online. Then join the discussion at pbs.org.
Frontline is made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. With major funding from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, helping to build a more just world. And additional funding from the Park Foundation.